Y'all. Today we are going to talk about something that went through my mind often when I was burned out. And it was, what is wrong with me? Am I alone? Do y'all have that same thought? I've had this thought off and on, for years of my career and also with things like marriage. This is called dissonance. This is when we are not in alignment with who we want to be. So it could be our beliefs, it could be our actions, it could be our thoughts. I know this is all sort of like hard to grasp, so I'm going to give you some really specific examples. With marriage, I was not who I wanted to be, and I didn't even really know who that was, but I just knew that, like, I don't really like myself. If I had to marry myself, 20 years ago again, if I had to start dating and I met my husband, I don't know that I would want to marry me all over again. And same thing with your job. Would you get hired again? The current you? Would your boss hire you again based on who you are now? But this was not in my head. And when I was burned out, the thing I kept thinking over and over was, why can't I be happy? What is wrong with me? How do I fix this? Because I am a fixer, and many of us who are in healthcare are also fixers. So the word for this, as I said, is dissonance. This is when you are out of alignment with who you want to be. And you may not consciously think this, but you're going to feel it. So it is going to feel like a dis-ease. It's going to feel like you're just off. You can't figure out what's wrong, but you know that something is not right. And our tendency is to blame everybody else, to try to fix them. And that's sort of at the stage in my marriage where I was when we went to this marriage retreat. I was like, somebody needs to fix him. And it turns out, and I said this in the last episode, instead of like having the magnifying glass on him or on your job, what we learned to do at this marriage retreat was to instead hold a mirror in front of ourselves. And so we're going to continue that discussion today. All right, so how do you currently describe yourself? Let's figure out first if you're out of alignment. So if you were being 100% honest with me, how do you currently describe yourself? Like true, down to your core. Who are you? Do you like who you are? Are you the version of yourself that you want to be? Like 10 years ago, if you could look ahead at the future you, the you who is you right now, would you be like, yeah, I really like her. She is who I aspire to be. So most of us, the answer would be like, not really. I mean, if we're truly honest with ourselves, probably not. So I've been this way with my burnout before, where I was having all these negative thoughts about woe is me. Why can't they appreciate me more? Why can't they pay me more? Why can't my patients get here on time? Why can't my patients do what I tell them to do? Use the acne cream, use the steroid cream, go on the injectable that I tell them about. So it was always like, why can't they fix themselves? Sorry, y'all. I had an outline and I am a little bit blind. I need readers now. So I'm trying to see this. Okay, so this was the biggest aha at the retreat was when we talked about making up stories about a situation or a person to justify how we think, feel, or act. So I'd read a book that was required reading by my office manager like 2 years ago. And I can't even remember the name of it, but it talked about this same thing. It just didn't have an impact on me at the time. It was talked about going into the box. And the whole idea is that we judge people, circumstances, and we make up stories in our heads. And so we've all done this. I did it right before the marriage retreat. And I'll tell you about that. I was in my car and I was going to an ethnic grocery store that I'd never been to before to find some very specific Honduran cheese to go in these tortillas that one of Ollie's friends' moms was going to teach me how to make. So she'd sent me a screenshot, told me where to get it. So I pulled up, neighborhood I'm not familiar with. And this lady approached me and she just said, "Hey, miss." And I started making up stories. This lady has mental illness. She's homeless. She's going to ask me for money or be really pushy, or maybe she's dangerous. And so this was all within like 2 seconds. I made up this story. And so my body reacted. Like I didn't realize it until I got in the store, but my heart was pounding. I was in full fight or flight mode, based not on facts, but based on the thoughts in my head. So my body reacted with, oh my gosh, my life is in danger. And my behavior showed that. I am embarrassed to say, but I got back in my car as she approached me and I locked the door. And I was in the box, in the box. So this means that I was making up stories in my head, and these stories were justifying. So that's what the whole story thing is about. You're justifying your actions, your feelings. It wasn't until like a week later, we're sitting at this retreat and we're learning about being in the box and how we do this with our partners when we make up stories. And I realized, oh my gosh, like this, I had this whole scenario like woven into my brain about how she was dangerous and she was going to make me feel unsafe. And this is also what I had been doing in relationships, like I guess I would make up stories like, it's not fair, he's not doing his part, or he doesn't care, or here we go again. So, what does this have to do with your job? Well, you may not believe me if I tell you this, but 100% of our suffering is due to our thoughts. Can you believe that? I know it sounds unbelievable. And I had heard this expression before that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, what if your child dies? Like you don't have the option to not suffer. What if your boss fires you? Like that's going to hurt. So, grief, disappointment, sadness, those are all legitimate emotions. But when we get stuck there, it is a choice. And so we replay stories over and over in our heads, or we weave new stories. I remember as a kid, I would weave these elaborate stories about my parents getting in a car accident and dying. And, I would even get tears in my eyes because it felt so real. And it wasn't, it was all made up in my head. And same thing with your job. You don't even realize how much of what you're feeling and suffering is not even real. It's what your brain thinks is real. So you've probably all heard of Viktor Frankl. Um, Dr. Frankl was a psychiatrist and he lived in Vienna, Austria during the Holocaust. He was arrested, he and his family. He was the only one who survived. And later he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read that, you should definitely read it because it gives you that sort of like head jerk perspective shift that you may need if you're in a rut and you're having all these like, oh God, it's never going to get better. What's wrong with me? If you're having all those thoughts, consider reading that book. So what Viktor Frankl noticed was that everything could be taken away from him and from his fellow prisoners. The prison guards took away every single freedom these men had, except for one. They could not take away the prisoner's choice. in how they reacted, in how they thought about their circumstances. And Dr. Frankel noticed that the prisoners who survived were the ones who thought more outwardly. They weren't the ones who were, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm going to die. Instead, they had agency over their thoughts. They had a choice, and they chose what went on in their brain. They chose how they saw their circumstances. So they were, he was on a work crew where the death rate was astronomical. But he chose to see his circumstances as, okay, this is happening to me. I don't have a choice about being in this work crew, but I do have a choice in my attitude and how I see it. And doesn't that sound crazy that you would be in this? Your family has been killed. You are being starved to death. You are skin and bones. You're seeing your prison mates die every single day, and yet you can choose how you respond. And so that is what I try to teach people, and it's what I try to do. I mean, heck, I try to, every day I fail, and every day I try to start over, and I just remind myself, like, I have a choice. Every single day I have a choice. And that's ultimately what got me out of my burnout, was realizing I have a choice. That is something your employer cannot take from you. Your spouse cannot take that from you. It is 100% up to you how you see your circumstances and how you choose to respond. So I'll say that again. It is 100% up to you how you choose to respond to your circumstances. So this reminded me of when my kids were little and they would throw huge tantrums in the grocery store, or once when we were in line waiting to see Santa Claus at a Christmas festival. And my daughter was throwing down. Ollie can throw down like nobody's business. She was screaming, and you're in line. You've invested so much in waiting in this stupid long line. And you're like, by God, we are going to see Santa. You're going to sit your butt on Santa's lap, and I'm going to get that picture. So this was going on in my head. And she's on the floor screaming, and she's been over sugared. And so the story in my head was, she's terrible. She's going to end up, this is going to be her as a teenager. I'm a terrible mom. Everybody here is judging me. Like, this is all the story in my head. I was out of alignment or in dissonance with who I wanted to be. So if I could have asked my, pre-baby self, like, okay, well, how would you rather be as a parent, as a mom? I would rather be experiencing the magic of Christmas with my kids. And like, even if I could go back now, I would have been like, look at that chunky little girl with pigtails. Like, wow, she has such emotion and such energy. And instead, I was justifying the thoughts in my head. I was thinking, she has been over sugared. She is being ridiculous. People are judging me. So that's what we do. We justify it. The other thing that I learned in the retreat was, okay, you have your desire of who you want to be. And this is sort of like your highest self. So you have this version of you that you strive to be. And you have a choice. So it's like your two choices kind of come down, branch out. You can choose to honor that, or you can choose to betray that. And that's why in the beginning I asked you, like, who are you, and do you like who you are? Are you in alignment with who you want to be? And if you're not, it's because you have chosen that branch that is betrayal. You are betraying who you really want to be, who you strive to be. And that's what I did at that grocery store. When that woman approached me, I do not want to be the type of person who assumes the worst. And I did. And I betray who I want to be. So how do you know? This is called being in the box, as I said. So let me pull my notes down. How do you know when you're in the box? Well, a lot of times you will have physical symptoms out of proportion to whatever's going on. So in this case, my heart rate was increasing. I felt scared. And you can name your emotion. So another clue that you're in the box is pretty much any negative emotion, but especially if it's I call it a hysterical emotion. Our marriage therapist used to say if it's hysterical, it's historical, meaning if you had this like crazy big reaction that you're like, whoa, where did that come from? It's probably historical. So you are pulling memories from the past. You're looking for evidence to support whatever your current thoughts are, and it's making it worse. So signs you're in the box would be negative emotions, physical symptoms out of proportion to what's really going on, and if you're bringing in like stories from the past. So I was doing all of those things. And so what do you do if you realize you're in the box? Well, before we go there, part of our homework for the marriage retreat was to at least once a day reflect on when you were in the box. So in order to do this, you've got to get quiet. You have to have some self-awareness. You have to be willing to admit when you were having those thoughts, like this homeless lady is about to attack me, or I think my husband is selfish and he doesn't pull his weight. So you have to be willing to admit all these thoughts that are popping into your head. And then how do you get out of the box? So recognizing you're in the box, admitting what your thoughts are, and then how the heck do you get out of the box? And why do you want to get out of the box? I mean, sometimes it feels good to marinate in that self-righteousness, right? So one of the things that stuck with me was you are in the box if you're justifying it, even if you're right. So let's say this woman at the grocery store was coming over to ask me for money, and maybe she was mentally ill. It doesn't matter. I'll say that again. It doesn't matter if you're right. You can still be in the box. You cannot talk sorry, let me rephrase that. Can you communicate to get yourself out of the box? Can I talk myself through it? Like if I'm convinced that my boss is underpaying me, or that she or he doesn't appreciate me, that my coworkers are lazy, will communicating how I feel and why I am justified, will that get me out of the box? No, it will not. I know, isn't that sucks, because so many of us, we have words and we can get up on our podium and we can just expound over and over about how we're right, why the other person is wrong. But that will not get you out of the box. You are choosing to suffer. You're choosing to stay in the box. Okay, so how do you get out of the box? You have to make up an alternate story. Doesn't that sound so simple that it's probably wrong? Just try it. So you make up a different story, and you can say it out loud. You can write it. It does not even have to be true. It can be fanciful. It can be, whatever. So you've probably heard this story of the kids who were running around on the train, on the metro. So these three kids were just creating chaos, running around. It was like a Sunday morning. This guy's trying to read his newspaper, and these three kids are just running up and down and, throwing stuff and being loud and fighting with each other. And so the guy reading the newspaper looks over at their dad. There's no mom around. Looks over at his dad, and he's like making up a story. boy, that dad is lazy. He doesn't even care that the kids are bothering me. They're out of control. These are juvenile delinquents waiting to happen. And he somehow starts a conversation with the dad, and the dad says, yeah, they just lost their mom. We just came from the hospital. They don't really know how to handle it. And so it's an immediate shift in perspective, an alternate story. And so we don't always have the benefit of like asking the other person, like, what's really going on. And if you don't, make up an alternate story. When that driver cuts you off, make up a story instead of choosing to justify your actions and your thoughts. Make up an alternate story that his kid is, let me fix this. His kid is sick in the hospital and he is like racing to be, excuse me, to be with his kid. So make up an alternate story. Oh, another way, sorry, I just get out of breath. I get so excited. You also have to look within. So when I used to teach yoga, I would have in the beginning, we would do like a little meditation, and I would tell my students to pretend like they had this little flashlight. You know, when they close their eyes, just pretend you have a little flashlight and you're like shining it around inside your body. And you're looking for areas that are tight, that are full of emotion. You know, we hold issues in our tissues. So sometimes just getting quiet and sort of looking within, just taking a few deep breaths, and it allows you to just sort of step away from your brain just for a second. Let's see. Okay, sorry. The last thing I want you to do is to choose the alternate story and then decide that you don't want to spend your life in the box. Decide that you would rather have a different thought and just see how that feels in your body. And you may have to play tricks with your brain, and you may have to say, if that were true, if that were if this alternate story were 100% true, how would I react differently? How would my body feel different? You know, so imagine that guy on the train and the kids are misbehaving, and then he learns that their mom just died. So if that were 100% true, how would it feel different in his body? And he would probably say, well, gosh, I felt this wave of compassion or sadness or whatever. So ask yourself, like, how would it feel different in your body? So catch yourself thinking these thoughts. Catch yourself when you're in the box. This is going to require daily reflection. You may have to write it down. You may have to have somebody hold you accountable, but you're going to have to realize when you're in the box. And then you're going to have to choose a different story. Choose an alternate story. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just the fact that you are choosing your thoughts. You are not in a concentration camp, but you are still capable of choosing. This is a freedom that we all have. We can choose whether or not to have thoughts that make us suffer. And the last thing I wanted to say is that nobody can put you in the box. So when we studied this at work that time, I remember a few of us would like laugh, and we would be like, we would either point out that other people were in the box, or we would say that somebody put us in the box. And that was not the point. You can't be put in the box by anybody else. It's like I tell my kids, they can't make you mad. Nobody can make you mad. You're choosing to get mad. And they hate when I say that, but it's so true. And I have to remind myself about that too. So yeah, you don't need to point out when anybody else is in the box, because you're making up stories to justify how you're judging them, right? Okay. So I hope this has been helpful. If you're like, I don't know if I'm in the box, but I also don't necessarily like who I am right now and I'd like to change, then reach out. We can go over this in a very personal way. And I promise I'll try to stay out of the box while I'm talking to you. So anyway, reach out. My email is hope.cook@gmail.com. I read every single email. And yeah, all right. See y'all later.